All right, y'all, welcome to the show. So, in just a second, Mehdi Hasan has issued a dire warning of potential civil war in this country. That's something in the past I would have poo-pooed. I would have said, nah, man, that's a little much. But when you listen to the explanation, it's like, yeah, I can see that happening. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Israel. In all seriousness, they've reached the point of no return. The updates I have for you today are just... It's like, I can't believe we're witnessing this shit. I cannot believe we are living through a horrific chapter of history. Then we'll get to the truth has been revealed about Bill Maher's dinner with Donald Trump. We have some reports coming out of there, so we'll talk about that. Jon Stewart is in awe of Trump's ability to pathologically lie. We have Bill Burr roasting conservative crybabies. Trump and Elon slashing the Meals on Wheels program, which is like one of the lowest, dirtiest things you could do. And then, really important story later on. It's a bombshell story about how the U.S. food system is honestly on the brink of collapse, if I'm being honest with you, because of this honeybee crisis that we're currently dealing with that nobody seems to be talking about. Nobody's talking about it. But we will. So we'll talk about all that and more. Everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. That helps out massively and costs you nothing at all. And of course, much love and appreciation to all of you who make this show work by donating a couple bucks a month on Patreon. That goes a really long way. As you all know, this is real independent media. I've never talked to an advertiser. I've never done an ad read or anything like that. And so you guys fund the show from the ground up on Patreon and with your tips on YouTube and with joining Crystal Kyle and friends over on Substack. So again, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. All right, let's go ahead and dive into it. So Mehdi Hasan was having a conversation here with a bunch of anti-Trump Republicans. I believe at least one of these guys is from the Lincoln Project. And they were talking about a scenario, which honestly does not sound absurd to me. If anything, it sounds like likely to me of how this country could end up in a civil war. And so they start talking about the era of the civil rights movement and desegregation and how you had the racist states in the South were hell-bent on not abiding by desegregation and what happened in response to that and how the federal government had to get aggressive, right? And you had this standoff, which was a dire, dire situation. So listen to that, and then they'll get into how this relates to today. Watch.
He called out the Arkansas National Guard to block the integration of the largest public high school in Little Rock, Central High School, successfully. So what did the president do then? He called out the fucking 101st Airborne and sent them. Mm-hmm. And then he federalized the Arkansas National Guard, and they were able to integrate. So that
the president was an anti-American communist named Eisenhower.
Exactly.
That noted progressive Eisenhower.
Now, it's sort of a note that, gets lost, except if, kind of from this part of the world. Father shut down every public school in Little Rock for a year as a reaction to that. Mm-hmm. It's still referred to as the lost year in there. But, when you have the federal government against the National Guard, as Earl Long, who was governor of Louisiana, Huey Long's brother said when a segregationist was saying that Huey should send the National Guard and the Highway Patrol to block federal troops from encouraging integration. He said, well, this guy's name was Leander Perez. He's a great Cajun character, segregationist. He said, well, that's fine, Leander, but what are you going to do now if the feds have the nuke? So...
we're in a reverse position right now.
We're in a reverse position.
Then it was the federal government coming in to stop racist and anti-democratic Southern governors. Right. Now we're in a position where the only people that can stand up to Trump are Democratic AGs who are taking him to court, state AGs, and Democratic governors like the Pritzkers of this world. And I think that's where somebody I follow on Twitter, his name is Brandon Friedman, he's a Democratic Party operative, veteran. He made a very good point where he said, I hope governors, blue state governors, are having meetings with their National Guard folks right now. I hope lines of communication are open. I hope relationships are good, because that is going to be the next test of the system. If Trump comes in, federalizes the Guard, insist that they work for him or not. Or if, and again, we have a shitty media, so no one really covered this very well. Stephen Miller said very openly last year, I think to the New York Times, and it got lost in all the other shit. He said, what we will do if we were looking for an immigrant that we want to take out, and it's, for example, Maryland, it's Wes Moore's Maryland, has someone we want, we will send in the Virginia Guard from next door. We will send in the Republican Guard. That would mean that Wes Moore's blue National Guard would be up against Virginia's red National Guard. I think that's what they call a civil war in the old days, right?
That scenario that he just laid out is a completely plausible scenario where we're effectively in a civil war at that point, right? So if Stephen Moore, who, by the way, is basically running aspects of the White House, certainly the immigration policy, if he decides, look, I'm sending ICE to Maryland to get these people who I'm claiming are Nicaragua or whatever, right? They have no evidence. They make shit up all the time. And the Democratic governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, says, no, you're not. I'm not cooperating with you. You're not coming in here and taking away people's due process rights, taking away their constitutional rights, and shipping them off to an El Salvador slave labor camp. I'm blocking you. Stephen Moore said, I'll send the Red Virginia National Guard. Virginia, the governor is Youngkin, Republican. I'll send the Virginia National Guard into Maryland to get these people. And that's when Wes Moore says, I called up the Maryland National Guard to block you. And that's like a state v. state scenario, or state backed by the feds versus state. But as they described there, back during the desegregation fights, thankfully, the federal government was on the right side, where they were saying, shut the fuck up, you're going to desegregate, that's the law, bitch. And the racist states were like, no, we're not. They're like, oh, really? And so they tried to deploy the state National Guard to block desegregation, but then the feds sent in federal troops and were like, you're desegregating now. We're not going to let you block this. And so that was a standoff, right? And obviously, eventually, the federal government won. But at the same time, in this scenario, if the federal government wins, what are we looking at? Just absolutely from top to bottom codified fascism, where Democratic attorneys general, Democratic governors can't stop the federal government from being jackbooted thugs and rounding people up without any due process and shipping them off to an El Salvador slave labor camp. So this truly is a crossroads. The other issue, which is a huge issue, is with the courts, they have no enforcement mechanism, right? So this system relies on the goodwill of the executive branch and the goodwill of the legislative branch, that when the judicial branch says something and makes a ruling, because they have judicial review, that the other branches of government go, okay, we're abiding by your ruling. But if they decide we're not going to, well, what do? There are no judicial troops or judicial police or judicial law enforcement. It's just like, but we demand it. And they're like, that's nice, that's cute. Like Andrew Jackson said, oh, you did your ruling, now enforce it. And that's his way of saying, bitch, you got no actual power, you're a paper tiger. And so we're at a whole bunch of crossroads here, and the scenario that they laid out here is perfectly plausible. In fact, I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't want the Democratic governors and the Democratic attorneys general to lay in a chalk outline of themselves and say, go ahead, feds, violate whatever law you want, violate the Constitution if you want. Since you're the feds and the supremacy clause of the Constitution exists, you go ahead and we're just going to take a back seat. I wouldn't want that. I want somebody standing up for people's rights. And if that's Democratic governors or Democratic attorneys general, I want that. Right? And if it leads to a standoff, it leads to a standoff. And, I hope the right side of that wins. But what a terrifying scenario to think of. And in the past, guys, what has my line always been on the idea of a civil war in this country? It's incredibly far-fetched to believe that we could have a civil war, for the simple fact that we're packed full of distractions in this country. Are you fucking kidding me? Between professional sports and TV and TikTok and YouTube and Hulu and Netflix and, whatever things you got going on in your own life with your own kids. You go to soccer practice, you go to hockey practice, basketball, whatever the fuck, right? Everybody's got lives, everybody's got jobs, everybody's got hobbies, there's so many good distractions. So it always struck me as incredibly far-fetched. But I have to admit, that's a failure of my own imagination, to imagine a scenario where you have a total stock market collapse. You have millions of people being unemployed, being laid off, both in the private sector and in the public sector. You have tariffs which increase consumer goods massively, at least 20 or 25%. You have a global system which is collapsing because the U.S. is the center of global trade, and now they're putting their middle finger up to everybody, and our own allies turn on us, and they drop the dollar as the world reserve currency. You have a government which has gone 100% fascist, totally ignoring the Constitution, shipping people out without due process, etc. And if you have anybody with a conscience or moral clarity, and they have a position of power in a state, they are going to have to stand up to that, right? And in that scenario, do you put it past Donald Trump to say open fire on the Maryland National Guard? I fucking don't. Do you put it past Donald Trump to say Wes Moore, I'm federalizing the Maryland National Guard from you, and then you see a split among the Maryland State National Guard, and some go with Trump, some go with Wes Moore, and this could get fucking messy. It's already messy. It could get way more messy, right? So, yeah, this is not good, y'all. This is not good. And that was the first explanation I've probably ever heard in the modern era where I'm like, that's totally plausible as to how some sort of actual war between the state and the federal government can kick off, right? And I already think the ball is rolling on a number of things. I think the U.S., our time is limited being the world reserve currency because we've already pissed off all of our allies. They're already making other alliances now behind our backs because they're like, these people are unreliable. These people are chaotic. These people are not good to their word. These people could invade any of us. If he's saying I'm going to steal Greenland, what, you think fucking Australia's sitting there like, we're good? No, we can fucking steal Australia too, right? They're all thinking this shit. And so TikTok, man, I don't know what the full unraveling is going to be or what the issue is going to be that makes it apparent to everybody, but I already think the ball is rolling. And that's a terrifying thought. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.